I'm prepping to get the first big pour done tonight. This is going to be one of the end panels that's made out of MDF. This is the one that goes into the window. It's got the styrofoam extension on it. And what I'm working on right now is this is the end that's going to be exposed. So when you walk into the shower, this is going to be the end that you're looking at. And so I want this edge right here to look really good. So my plan is to use a piece of aluminum angle completely wrapped in Tyvek and tape it with about an 1/8 of an inch gap off this edge so that I get that to fill up with epoxy and form about an 1/8 inch layer of epoxy on the edge, maybe even a 1/4 inch, since I'm going to do a 1/4 inch on the top, and that way I can sand it and polish it really smooth. My concern was based on how things went when I was working on the shower caddy with leaking through where I tried to make seals with Tyvek tape straight edges, that it would bleed through to the back edge and I might not be able to peel it off. So I'm putting Tyvek tape on the back so that anything that bleeds through will release and peel off. The Tyvek tape is super sticky and I was afraid it might peel the red guard off, so I've got a layer of masking tape and then the Tyvek tape, and then we'll tape the straight edge on and we'll flip it over and get ready to do the pour. But I just wanted to cover what I was doing here to make this edge release. The panel is leveled. The angle aluminum is on. It's spaced with my favorite measuring and spacing medium Haute Hotel key cards. So those are coming out. And the next step is I'm going to have to pour a layer. Should stop filming one-handed. I keep hitting the volume button, which stops recording. So the spacers are out, and I wish I was about to pour the color coat with the marbling in it, but I'm not, because this piece of MDF, just a slight bit of bow in it. So I'm gonna take 2 gallons of the quick set epoxy, pour it out on here, and let it self level. That should give me about 2.5 mils on the edge and 1/2 mil in the middle, and then I'll be flat so that I can come back with the regular epoxy for the color coat. So I mixed up a little bit of thick epoxy to fill some holes here that I want to be able to drill through, and give that just a little bit of time to set, and then we'll mix up the leveling coat and pour it out. And it was an absolute disaster. It's actually 2 days later. When I mixed up the quick set epoxy, it felt like it was going to be a little too thin to do what I wanted to do. So I put some thickener in it, and I put too much thickener in it, and so it wouldn't self-level at all. So I tried to use a piece of aluminum angle iron and a level and screed it, and it worked great for about the first half, and then it was quick set and it started to kick, and it got really thick and really stiff, and I couldn't screed it anymore. And the whole bottom half is just a mess. I've actually spent probably 6 or 8 hours trying to clean it up already. I took a multi-tool and tried to get all the blobs off, and then I tried to use the air file to flatten it. Epoxy normally sands very easy, but with the thickener in it, it's like a brick. Even with 40 grit, I'm not having any luck getting it flat. So this piece has got to go in the trash, and the question is, do I go get another piece of MDF and make sure this one's flat before I bring it home? I had the other one delivered, by the way. I didn't get to check it before it was delivered. Or do I make the end panels out of foam like the SCC guys did, and then just put in a brace for the shower doors. I'm leaning heavily towards that way. The foam is so much easier to work with, and it's easier for me to carry around by myself now that my help is gone, and the foam is always flat. So I'm gonna mull that one a little bit and then make a decision. But don't do this. Don't try to screed the quick set. You don't have time. You'll make a mess. I just did the final pour on the shower caddy. So one side at a time, rotating it 90 degrees so that each pour on the sides overlap the seam at every corner, and then glued the back on, epoxied the back, and that seals the entire bottom edge. So this entire caddy is completely waterproof now, watertight. So this will set for 24 hours, and then I'll take this panel, which is the back wall, back inside and pin it in place and install the shower caddy to make sure I get it perfectly set on depth, and then it'll get bonded in place. And once that's done, then I can start working on the epoxy on the big panel. I decided to remake the end pieces out of foam. So much easier to work with. See where I marked off where I'm going to reinforce it, put the brace in for the shower door to mount to. And so, what I'm getting ready to do now is bond in the shower caddy and bond on the window seal to the back so that the shower caddy, the window seal, the back panel are all one solid piece when I epoxy it and there's no seams in it. So I've masked off anything I don't want to get epoxy on, and I'll mix up some quick set epoxy with thickener in it and bond these 4 pieces together. Wait about 5 hours and then I should be able to carry it out of here. All right, I got the big panel back out in the shop. Caddy's bonded in, window seals bonded on. Shower caddy came out pretty gnarly. Shower caddy's not very flush, so I'm just gonna take the DA sander and some 80 grit and get that flush, and clean up a couple of edges where the glue set, and then this one will be ready for the fiberglass coat. And that would be a monumental achievement if I could get the fiberglass coat on today. Ultimately, I wound up using the multi-tool to do the bulk of the work, and then the DA to finish it out. So what I'm going to do now is tape up the front, flip this over, and completely seal it from the back using some quick set epoxy with thickener in it. And I got the shower caddy completely sealed up properly. And then I flipped this thing back over, I taped it up, and I primed it, getting ready for the strength coat. The strength coat is some quick set epoxy with some fiberglass mat, which is those rolls right there. So about 1/8 of an inch of quick set epoxy and the fiberglass mat give it a ton of strength. The shower caddy and the window seals already have what I'm calling the beauty coat. Right, the color of the top looks like marble on it, so I don't want the strength coat getting on them, so they're masked off. When we get ready to do the beauty coat, get an idea of how I can maybe blend them so that it makes it look like one piece rather than 2 pieces that are just stuck together. We'll go over that when we do it, but for now, it's late at night, so the strength coat's coming in the morning. I've got a couple of gouges I've got to take care of. What I'll do is before I put the strength coat on, I'll just pull a little bit of that quick set out, thicken it so that it's like putty or peanut butter, rub it down in the gouges before I pour on the regular stuff. And that'll need a half a day, and then if everything goes well, I should be able to kind of remask based on how I want to try and blend the beauty coat, and be able to pour the beauty coat tomorrow night on this one. And this is the biggest, hardest panel, so if I can get this one done, it'll be a huge sigh of relief. Moment of truth. Spent a lot of time making this panel, getting it bonded, getting it cut, getting the sills and the caddy colored. This is the part where it could all go wrong. I'm about to start the quick set for the strength layer. You can see I've got the fiberglass mat on there. It's a self-adhesive mat, so you just have to kind of lay it out. A little difficult with one person, it'd be pretty easy with two. But I got it, and so it's 25 square foot. The Stone Coat Countertops website called for 1 gallon for 40 square foot, so it says I need 3/4 of a gallon. But I ran the calculations, and that's less than 1/8 of an inch, closer to a 1/16 of an inch coat. And given how I bonded these panels together, and I've got these glue seams and all the pitting around the caddy, I'm going to double it so that I get a thicker coat. It will add a little weight, but it should add a lot of strength, and it should help hide a lot of the imperfections and flaws I've got to where I bonded these panels together. On the other panels I've got for the end pieces, they're solid pieces. They don't have any bonding, so they don't have all this issues. I could probably get by with a thinner coat, but for this one we're going to go with the thick coat and see how it works. At the very last minute, I decided instead of mixing 2 gallons in a 5-gallon bucket, I'd mix a gallon each in 2-gallon buckets. So I split the pour in half. I think it worked out pretty well. I actually have about a half a gallon left over, so the website called for about 1. I used 1 1/2, and I think it worked out pretty well. I don't think the panel's ruined at all. I'm real happy with it. I think once this all kind of levels itself out and dries, I will be ready for the color coat. The quick set epoxy definitely gives off a lot more fumes than the regular, so I'm gonna get out of here and we'll touch base when it's done. Moment of truth. It's time for the color coat on the biggest, most complicated panel. If I get this right, it should be downhill from here. This panel is still pretty rough. You can see the ridges from the notch trowel. I must have over thickened the structural coat, the strength coat. So I'm gonna go with a double thick coat of the finish coat to make sure that it self-levels in all those little grooves, which means we're gonna make up 4 gallons of the Stone Coat Countertops epoxy. That'll be 4 gallons total. I'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket. I'll break out about a half of a gallon probably for the silver, and then a pint for the bronze, and then pour it out and let it level. And then I'm gonna brush. We'll chop in all the silver and then drizzle in the bronze. So once that's done, it'll be time to pop the bubbles. Let's see how it looks when we're done. Man, what a relief. I am so stoked. This is looking fantastic. There's a few flaws that I'm gonna have to take care of after it dries, but nothing I don't think I can take care of. That corner was a little high there, and then I've got a little high spot over there. I'll just have to sand those down and then touch up the color by hand. I think it'll come out okay, but man, this is looking fantastic. You can still see the grooves a little bit from the structural layer, so I definitely have way too much thickener on there. I think that's just the way the peaks and the valleys are causing shadows in the epoxy. But if I look at it straight on from the side, like you'll be looking at it, or like the light will be hitting it in the shower, I think it's gonna be okay. If it's not, I can always throw a second coat on there. And that may ultimately be what I do. If I sand these high spots and I can't get them to look right, and I tilt this up vertical and those grooves look too pronounced, then we'll just throw a second coat on here. The color coat's not the hard part, so man, it looks fantastic though. That's insane. So I'm so stoked. This has got to dry for a couple of days at this point, and then because I'm going out of town, and when I get back, I'll do a little bit of sanding on it and see if I can finish the few spots that are a little bit rough and go from there. Wow. Well, this seems like a good place to do a little summary and wrap this video up and get it posted and pick up again next weekend. As this dried, the vertical lines, not necessarily vertical, but the grooves from the structural layer became more and more apparent. So I'm going to have to recoat this panel. So there's a lesson learned there. I was counting on the epoxy being self-leveling and not having to worry about getting the structural layer smooth. And it did self-level. This panel is perfectly smooth, but because there's the mica powder in it, it puddled in the grooves, and so you get those shadows. You can see the light spots where there's not as much mica powder on the high spots of the base layer as there is in the shallow spots. So the key takeaway is you have to have a perfectly smooth surface before you do your color layer. Your color layer can't be well, it will be self-leveling, but it can't be leveling things off, or you wind up with the dark spots. And if it was just some random high spots here and there, I think it would look fine, because this is supposed to look natural. But when it's very symmetrical, it doesn't look natural at all. So it's not a terrible fix. It's just another 4 gallons of epoxy. Basically, I'll take the long file and some 180 grit and block this out completely flat. It's almost flat. There's a couple of ripples on the edges there where I glued, and then where I glued the shower caddy in. So I'll block that out perfectly flat, prime this with some kilts, and then redo the pour, and it should come out perfect that time. It would be perfect now if it wasn't for those grooves. I mean, there's a little bit of bumpiness around the edges where I glued, but those would block out, and they're not straight grooves, so it would just look more like natural movement of the dye, or the powder, I guess. But those grooves are just unacceptable. So this one's getting redone. Lesson learned there. Make sure you've got a perfectly smooth structural layer before you pour your color layer. I had 2 options there. I could have either sanded the structural layer smooth to get the grooves out, or I could have just poured a layer of clear epoxy on it, let that self-level, and then poured my color layer. Either one of those would have worked. One's a lot less work to do a pour of just clear epoxy than it is to sand all the grooves out. So on my other 2 panels, we won't make that mistake. I won't over thicken the structural layer. It will self-level. I'll block it before I pour my color layer. But all that's going to be next weekend. This weekend's done.